4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to yet another cracking installment of the Matt Brown Show. This is the Built in New York series. This is going to be an interesting conversation, and that's because I have a very interesting company, let's just say, to connect you all to. It is Primary Wave, primarywave.com, and with me on the line is Justin Shukat, the president and founding partner of Primary Wave Music Publishing. Justin, welcome to the show.
Hey, Matt, thanks for having me. It's great to be connected.
Well, yeah, I mean, you guys are doing some incredible things in the music space. I was reading up all about you guys, like some of the most ridiculous, over 700 top 10 singles, over 300 number one hits, like the who's who of music on the show, well, on your portfolio: Bob Marley, Stevie Nicks, like Alice Cooper, the names go on. So I was wondering, just for our viewers and audience around the world, Justin, who potentially haven't heard of Primary Wave Music and all the great things that you guys are doing, why don't you kick us off with a bit about your background and color in the picture for us of Primary Wave and the origin story?
Okay, please do interject, because you can get me going down a rabbit hole, and please tell me to come up for air at any point. It's probably more interesting at that point. But my background, I was lucky enough. I grew up in a household with a father that was steeped in the entertainment business. He was a very well-known entertainment attorney. So when I came up, it was, my introduction was just, what your old man did. And it just seemed like a cool thing that he had worked at that point. One of his biggest clients was Yoko Ono, and he represented Yoko probably a year after, John Lennon had passed. So that's what really the early 80s. I'm in my late 40s. So, just that experience. And I guess I was always experienced because records used to show up at my house all the time. Even though I had divorced parents, I guess my dad's last address was my house. So the vinyl that record companies would send, promotional vinyl, would come on a weekly basis. So, I mean, that's really kind of where my love of music emanated from, the endless supply of music that would come daily, quite frankly. And I remember, really fighting for my mom's vinyl players. And, finally, when I was 13, for my bar mitzvah, I got a gift. Someone bought me 2 turntables and a microphone. And that really took my next level curiosity into music. And, as you go into the college years, I promoted and I DJ'd and did parties. And again, it was that influence of my father being in the entertainment business that, I had the luxury of, going backstage and, again, talk about the free music. So it was just, that was baked into my DNA. I was never quite musical. I didn't play an instrument. I definitely didn't have talent, but I had that access. And I think that was the taste, the excitement for me, going backstage, seeing the concert, watching my dad from afar. And that was the aphrodisiac, as they say, for me, that kind of, wanted me to do this and figure out, I guess there's a career from it. And upon leaving college and trying to figure out the answer to the question is like, what do you want to do with your life? I wanted to be music. And most people who knew me thought I was going to go to law school and follow my old man steps. But, I really wanted to, just kind of get a taste for myself. And, I went looking for opportunities. And my first thing I actually did out of college in the early 90s was I traveled over to Switzerland, again, through a relationship with my father. And I don't take that for granted that I had access that a lot others might not have. But I never took that for granted, because I do have a unique last name. And my dad passed away about 8 years ago. But something he said to me at a very young age, he said, listen, you do have a unique name. And I've worked my entire career, cementing himself in this business. He goes, just do me one favor. He said, you don't fuck it up. And like, that always stuck with me, about like, of like the inherent just ease of what we all do. If you do it with passion, and you do it the right way, it shouldn't be that hard. So I took that same mentality and I really carried that with me. But it went from working at the Montreux Jazz Festival for, a client friend of my dad's. And I did everything from, we did backstage interviews to being runners and just the experience around music. And that was my entree into the business, like just a taste for everything that I could get. I came home that summer and I went looking for a job and I interviewed for everything. And my first job in the music business was working for a gentleman named Walter Yetnikoff, who ran a company called, it was called Velvel Records. And Walter was a titan of the music industry, having been responsible for Columbia coming into and being bought by the Japanese, and which became Sony. So Walter was on top, and this was his first entree after kind of really getting pushed out by the Japanese. That's a whole other road you can go down, but it was an interesting time. This was the early 90s, and I got into the music business, and I worked for a small independent label, and I grew from there, and I worked there for a couple of years until that company ran its course, and it actually got acquired by a couple of the companies. And I was out of a job, and I went looking for another job, and I wanted to work in the music business. So I wound up pivoting, and I got a job working at Arista Records in the marketing department. It actually sets up the story because, at the time I got an assistant's job working for the head of marketing, and it's an exciting time. That's when, I think the first day that I started, there was actually the release of Santana's Smooth. So, a record that I got to play. Obviously, I didn't have anything to do with the making of the record, but that was my first day that song went out to radio, and what a run to be a part of that. And I had a lot of great times. But I worked at Arista, and a gentleman named Larry Mistel was the general manager. I'm sorry, I'm actually telling the story out of turn. Those were actually the Clive Davis years. I worked for Clive for years, and then while I was on at Arista, Larry Mistel, who is the gentleman who started Primary Wave and is the CEO, approached me. Larry came in and worked alongside Clive Davis in the early 2000s when BMG and Clive kind of morphed their new business. So Larry and I met from an old job, and fast forward several years, and really 2005, Larry called me. So I tell the story because it was working for an old boss is really what happened. Larry had run Arista Records, and we forged a relationship, working together for 3 years. And after we went on our ways to other businesses, he came knocking on my door. He I guess he liked what he saw, and he had an idea to start a business. And that was 16 years ago when he asked me to start Primary Wave with him. And I guess that's go. So I'll bring you up there. I don't know if you want to follow up there. We go down a lot of different areas, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. So I was chatting to you before we went live. Like, my first business was a record label. So I was young and dumb and thought I could walk on water. And somehow I did. I got lucky, and I kind of sold that first business, and then went on to put together a successful string of failures after all of that.
You have to fail in this business. Come on.
Oh, yeah, totally, dude. Totally. But like, I remember my mindset back then, and Napster had just happened. iTunes wasn't a thing, but the internet certainly was there. It hadn't had sex yet, so there was no real social media. But what I was doing was really preying on this idea of, you needed a record label as an artist to get your music released around the world. And so, and I'm just sharing this for context, just kind of like, because we'll connect the dots a bit later, but I created this thing called the Voodoo Vinyl Remix Network. And so what I would do is I would hunt around and discover new music which I really liked, and I would sign that music for free. So I'd own the master recording rights and for nothing. But then I would take your samples, your voices and your kick drums, all that stuff, and we'd load it up onto a forum, and then anyone anywhere in the world could come onto our forum and then download the original samples, remix a song, upload it onto our forum, and we would select the best tracks for release digitally around the world. Mm-hmm. But the artist didn't need the record label in reality. And where I'm going with all of this is like, how has the business of music changed over the years? Because, then iTunes came along, and there's that story about Steve Jobs. He put like the who's who of the record labels in the room, like EMI, Warner, and he's like, you guys are fucking idiots. Like, you don't get it. And then obviously iTunes happened, and then now there's Spotify, and now there's like direct to creator. So it seems to me like the space is changing constantly. Yep. So how has it changed from your perspective? Like, what's actually going on today in the business end of music?
I mean, there's a lot to unearth coming up. You're right. On everything you said, I mean, so much has changed. Again, I started getting paid to work in this business in the early 90s, and to see the changes, in 2022, from the ups and downs, quite frankly, the bad times and the good times, it is mind blowing. We are in a current environment where obviously streaming is king. Music has become very healthy right now. Obviously, also coming out of the pandemic, where obviously we saw a crushing blow to the live sector, which plays a huge part. I mean, that is, the pulse, the DNA of music is when you experience music live. So that being taken from us for so many years, for such a period of time, was very difficult, and also put a lot of pressure on a lot of different areas of the business. And quite frankly, it benefited certain areas of the business. And, one that, we do operate in, as you saw during the COVID times, there was a lot of people who had raised money to go make acquisitions and buying rights, that were that were probably previously never, for sale, quite frankly, in terms of what happened, because, the business that we've created at Primary Wave, we are rights managers. We've raised a lot of money, and we've gone out and we've bought different types of IP rights, whether it's publishing rights or master royalties or even master income. And, going back a couple years ago, I believe Wall Street really kind of almost woke up and saw the music industry in a whole new asset class. And not that I don't think it really had viewed it. I mean, most of the record companies for years had been these corporations and were operating, I don't want to say in silos, but they weren't viewed as financial vehicles. And I think there was not a change in the guard, but again, the business has changed, and they saw the opportunity, and everyone saw how healthy actually music was, even during such a terrible time, that, the music is being used all over, whether, again, it's not only streaming. We've seen the amount of content that is being made these days, and all great content is complemented by music. I mean, that is where it's, as an art form, it's so unique in nature that you don't make a TV show without music attached. You don't make a film. You don't make an advertisement. We are in every different sector in some way, in such a unique component, and you can do so much with that type of music, as you said, in terms of sampling. A song can be done in so many different ways. So there's a lot of different areas of where we're at right now. And it is unique because, we could talk about TikTok, and we could talk about social media and exploration in so many different ways, but I just look at the end of the day, of where we are right now, that the access that any individual has to make music, to make videos, to make content, to get that out to the masses, it's equalized it. It's almost made us unfortunate because there is so much content that is being created. And then how do you really reach the mass? The old adage of, like, what is top 40 radio? What is popular music? Well, there's so many layers and so many, subgenres these days that it really is difficult to really hit a mass audience on anything at this point.
Yeah, it is. Just on the funding piece, there was a release that went out, I think in October. You guys have raised $1.7 billion from Brookfield Asset Management, or etc. I know it's for music acquisition. How do you tackle something like that in terms of, like, the allocation of those funds around growth? It's a huge issue, and I know it's probably the biggest number that I've had on the show in terms of, like, I'm talking to the one of the partners or the founders, and they've raised a shit ton of money to go and scale. How do you decide on how to allocate that kind of money towards growth initiatives?
Good question, man. You really should have lined up my partner. He just brings me in for the creative vehicles at the end of the day. No, I mean, listen, we really, if you look how we branded and situated ourselves, again, I don't know what the moment in my partner's head was when he got the call. I mean, our first acquisition, and then I'll tie it all together, was we went after, we sat down with Courtney Love, and we bought the Kurt Cobain rights from Courtney 17 years ago, or 16 and a half years ago. And no one was looking at that. And to me, where's Kurt? Kurt was one of the greatest songwriters, greatest musicians. I always make these joke comparison. I put him on the Mount Rushmore of music, of, like, who are my top 4, top 5. And the fact that we had the opportunity there, and Larry always felt that we needed to be the home of legends, and we needed to put ourselves as a unique place, because we were all former record company guys and girls who started Primary Wave. And, something that we learned on the label side of the business when we were working for the record company was that was always frontline. Catalog music, you didn't invest a lot of time or money into it. It just kind of kept the lights on. People were always listening to those records. So our mentality from day one was, let's actually put some more energy and some more promotion and marketing into catalogs, and not just accept that a catalog is generating a certain baseline level of income. Let's actually put forward thinking. Let's look for the opportunity to create a new sync opportunity, or, obviously create a biopic, or think about Broadway. And that's been our mindset since day one. When we acquired the Cobain rights, Kurt hadn't been licensed. So we had to figure out, how do you open that up to business? And that we've taken that same mentality, same DNA, and brought it to all of our stuff. So when you ask about scaling, how do we grow? Of course, we have to add bodies, but it's going after the marquee names. It's going after the brands that we feel like we can actually really influence and grow alongside. And then you have to put thoughtful creative around it. And creative does take a lot of time. And, we have an exciting project. We've been working with the Whitney Houston estate now for, I think, 5+ years. And, a biopic is coming out this Christmas. Christmas, that's almost a 3 year in the making process of how long it takes to work and nurture a catalog. So, I mean, that is the good work at the end of the day. But it comes down to putting together a plan, looking for the opportunity. Just to bring it over, I want to bring it a full circle to answer your question. So you were saying in terms of how we scale it, tying it back.
Yeah. So how do you decide on how to allocate that funding to growth initiatives? So like,
Well,
because
when you say allocate, because we really look, I'm sorry to cut you up, and just please cut me right
fine.
off. It comes back to what I was saying in terms of these icons. We scale, looking at, the greatest songs. We get pitched all the time, and as the business change, there's a lot of music, and music spans a lot of different time periods, right? And different time periods gets monetized at different levels. We've also noticed that rock is performing tremendously well, from the 2000s to 2010s, and there's been great upward cycle from a streaming perspective. So you have to look at where music is being consumed from. When Spotify launched and, the playlist started launching, you see what type of music they're pushing, and you see the trend. So you have to pay attention to that stuff. Now, as a company, from an acquisition perspective, we haven't been going after to make acquisitions on songs that have had peak earning interest really in the last 7 years. Because if you're going to go buy an asset that is generating, X amount of incomes, they are going to fall off. We like to turn around and look at assets that have really plateaued. And then, if we feel like they fit into a certain area that we have an expertise in, where we can build, whether that's strong or sync, or put, creative resources. Maybe the songs could be sampled or interpolated, which obviously is happening a lot these days. Or, if songs do have opportunities, if there's a compelling story, to maybe make a doc, or there's a unique way to use a catalog. And that's how we'll actually, turn around and make our decisions. But again, for us, it's home of legends. We want evergreen copyrights that have been generating. So I'm not saying that it makes it easier, but unless a song has been a hit before, we're going to likely stay away from it.
Yeah, it's a fascinating challenge, isn't it? Or at least from my experience. I mean, if you think about the types of artists that you have on the Home of Legends, on your portfolio, there's Prince, Bob Marley, Stevie Nicks, James Brown, Smokey Robinson. Like, there's just, I'd go blue in the face trying to recount all those names.
And I get excited about it, but it's also, a lot of these things are partnerships where they're looking for strong partners that have expertise in different aspects of this business.
Mm-hmm. So, like, as an example, if it's back catalog, so let's take Bob Marley, for instance. So he's, obviously for my generation, like, everybody knows who he is. If I take a Gen Z person, for instance, and I go, who's Bob Marley? They probably wouldn't know, like the penetration, the awareness of that catalog, that amazing artist is not that well known. And then with Gen Zs being the predominant consumer of a lot of content these days, and even like if you look at the distribution of a workforce, Gen Z actually makes up most of the workforce.
Yep.
They're like digital natives. Like you and I are like, native analogs. Like we were born before the internet, really, like before we had smartphones and things. And so, and the future is really around this Gen Z digital native. I only ever knew the internet and the smartphone. Like my son or my daughter, for instance, like that's the thing that they will only ever know. How do you take something like a Bob Marley idea or catalog of music and make it relevant? Do you know what I mean? And I'm asking that question because I've seen some really interesting developments from like with someone like Snoop Dogg, for instance. So he created Maker's Place. So he's essentially taking his back catalog, if you like, and creating NFT collections for Gen Zs to consume. So it's a smart way to take like his whole portfolio. I mean, obviously, he may be a little bit more popular than, say, Bob Marley, but like, how do you successfully innovate when it comes to talent marketing, if you like?
There's a lot of ways to do it, and we can go on, and please, again, stop me at any point. I mean, first and foremost, you're always, when you deal with entertainment, when you
Oh, there you go.
So sorry. I saw myself freeze in the middle.
Yeah, no, it's cool. It's all good. So so the question was like, how do you innovate in this space when it comes to talent marketing?
Well, so we innovate looking at these catalogs for ways to reintroduce them to a younger generation. If you turn on the TV right now, obviously you're going to hear Bob Marley's music being advertised from a sandals commercial. Now, that's not going to be probably good enough to turn around and influence, a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid who's not paying attention to this, TV. They might hear the song. So it takes a lot of different ways of how you're going to get the song out into the marketplace at the end of the day. Synchronization. You want to look to have songs covered. You want to obviously have songs potentially, sampled, interpolated, use a component of a song and, create a new song. I think when we got cut off, I was talking about where we got a phone call a couple of years back from Maroon 5's camp, and Maroon 5 had created the song called Memories, which has a Bob Marley melody baked into the song. Now, that's not going to necessarily market the Bob Marley, but again, it's knowing those melodies that we've heard in different, inclinations in our life, whether that's in the radio, listening to a radio in the car with our parents, or from a TV, or from a film, or being influenced, from a Spotify playlist. So there's a lot of different areas where you're gonna, find how people will be influenced for music, and then it's our job to get creative and come up with new ways of music. I mean, a perfect example right now is that my team worked on very hard was, we acquired the classic Rick Astley song "Never Gonna Give You Up," which was written by three gentlemen. One named Pete Waterman that we had done a deal with about a year and a half ago. And our creative team had an idea to turn around and use that classic melodic that we all know of "Never Gonna Give You Up," which is the classic Rick roll. And they went and created a new music, new music production, and they pitched it to a producer, and they brought it to the artist Young Gravy, and Young Gravy and his team wrote a new version of a song, completely new lyrics, new idea. And the song's called Betty. And the song Betty has the sound of "Never Gonna Give You Up." And it's that sample. So we take a song that is literally almost 30 years old, and we've recreated a hit with a young contemporary artist in Young Gravy who hits a completely new audience. Now, this past August, Gravy was just teasing that song out to his audience, through TikTok. Something that like Rick Astley's team is not going to do, or a record company's not going to do. That came from, Young Gravy having just, messed around in the recording studio. He's doing that on his own from his phone. That aspect of even marketing never even took place when record companies used to break and market records. You think an artist was just going to tease out to their audience to like 4 or 5 million people, or whatever that number is. That relationship, that access point never actually existed. So I think that's a whole nother element of the equation that is exciting. It's scary. It's a wild west, but it can't be replaced, because you know what happened the minute he put a teaser, maybe 15 seconds out, his audience exploded, and he had the best customer research he could have ever had, and then you worked with it. And then of course he goes through the process and he works with his record label Republic, who puts out through the proper DSPs. And then when they saw the proper reaction from its streaming, well, then the record company made the decision, well, maybe we'll take it to traditional radio. And I only talk about that because, again, the equation that the record companies even used to work from when I started going back 20 plus years ago, in terms of, an artist releases, delivers an album, and then, you put together a plan, and then you have maybe a 90-day cycle until you release. All that stuff's been thrown out the window, and it's a whole new world, and, rules are being broken, and they're being rewritten on a daily basis. So, again, to answer your question, that was the grand slam for us, when we could turn around and take one of these classic songs. And that's what I'm always pushing the team to do, and to look to re-engage and look for new and creative ways, to expose our music to a wider audience.
Yeah, I had just on that. It's quite interesting. I was chatting to a startup out in Texas called MVP, musicians, vocalists, and poets. That's what that stands for. But they're creating like a platform for artists to essentially be discovered. And one of the key insights that Amanda shared with me, she said, was some ridiculous number. It was like, I'm gonna probably fuck this up, but it's like 90% of new artists remain undiscovered. Like, it's overwhelmingly
worse.
Is it worse than that? Really?
Yeah, definitely.
Why is that? Like, I'm fascinated by it. In the world of like, hey, you can, be a media company.
It comes to access. Where we talked, it's the phone, it's the computer that we're talking on. And it's like, When Apple created these devices that gave the access points to record music, I mean, the entree into the world used to be the recording studio. We cut that out. When you cut the recording studio out and the ease to record and create, and then the ability to upload and reach the masses, it changed it. Obviously, we still see the stuff that sits on top and what can be marketed and promoted on a mass scale, on a global scale. Things do break through on an indie basis, but yeah, there's a lot of material that's being put out on a daily basis. I don't want to quote wrong numbers, but I know it's tens of thousands of new pieces of music being uploaded on a daily basis. And how do you stand out? I mean, even on a for every Friday, New Music Friday on Spotify, what do they plug? 200 new songs? I mean, 200 of how many? And how many hours are in the day that you and I could even get through 200 songs? I mean, it's my job, and I get through a lot of them, and I get through like 60, and maybe it's 15 seconds, and I'm looking for different types of information, and whether that's a songwriter, or a producer, or a new artist, or a cover, and there's a lot to unearth on a daily basis, and we're just talking about music without even adding in podcasts and new streaming shows. It just seems like there's a lot of entertainment, but again, it goes back to what I said before. We sit in a unique position where whether it's a podcast, a new show. I mean, I'm watching White Lotus. I'm late on that, and I was watching it literally at 5 a.m. Great music in it. Every music's always complementing something else at the end of the day, which I think is so exciting. Super Bowl is coming up right now. It's a football game, but it's also the biggest advertising, day of the year. Advertising, they need music. Ties right back into what we're doing. So, that's what we look at. Then you turn the picture, the Grammys, and then the Oscars. What's always there? Music. Art Basel was this weekend. Music's there too. So that's what to me is so intoxicating about what we do at the end of the day. It's unique. We're a diamond. People always ask me, and I sometimes I articulate right, and sometimes I just fumble my words, but that's just who and what I am. Music is the great Mona Lisa. How do you put a value on a Bob Marley song? How do you put a value on, Smells Like Teen Spirit? Like those songs, Michael Jackson songs, John Lennon songs, like when you hear those songs, there are moments in time for each of us as an individual, and they strike us. They mean something different to you than they do to me. When one artist performs it as opposed to another voice, it could sound so differently, so shockingly, and that's what's so exciting and so unique. So it's like, to me, it's like this empty canvas that that you're just painting and you could change and do magical things with. So you got me excited to see. I'm gonna start talking about music, and I really got going when that happens.
So what would you say are like some things to look out for in terms of opportunities in the music publishing sector for entrepreneurs currently? Maybe for context on that, I know it's a big question, but the reason why I'm asking that is if you think about the EMIs of the world, etc., Warner Music and that, and it was kind of like you had to have Mariah Carey on your list, because if it wasn't Mariah Carey, you know what I mean, like they wouldn't get the revenue, the business model wouldn't work unless you had a flagship talent person, artist on your portfolio, on your roster. And then iTunes came along and they were like, yo, we're going to go with the long tail, right? And so we're going to make more money off the $30, let's just say the $1 transactions across 10,000 artists that no one's heard about, and then add those up together, you'll make more money than Mariah Carey. So that's like one example. So what would you say are like some opportunities right now in the space from a business perspective?
I mean, exactly what you said. I mean, there's plenty of publishers that are doing that to service, the 60,000 new pieces of music that are probably out on a given week. There's a business there when you could service at a much higher level, and that's ongoing. So I think for publishers, for rights owners, it's going to continue to look at areas where you can grow your catalog. That's going to be at the end of it. Everyone's going to try to increase the value, but there's different access points into this business that exist outside just legendary catalogs. I mean, the contemporary business is there. I guess I'm struggling articulating to you, because there's so many different sectors of the business that kind of really do. They're layered and they sit on top of each other, that I don't want to go down a road and say something that will not completely connect to your listener or viewer, because they might not have an understanding of how music gets paid out, because there are so many different mouths to feed at the end of the day.
Yeah, maybe I suppose one is the metaverse, right? So that's a really big trend at the moment.
Just repeat. I didn't hear what you said.
The metaverse.
The metaverse,
Like,
okay.
yeah, like this digital. Well, I guess maybe the bigger context that I see just from conversations that I've had over the last few months is this. The biggest trend here is around ownership. So, as a
Yep.
creator, I'm an artist, whoever it is, back catalog, current, or future artist. But I'm able to now, given my audience, a sense of ownership of my work over and above just the music itself. So, for instance, in my music video, which is digital, right? You can own something within that. Does it
Yep.
make sense? So, like, as part of my community of fans, I'm able to commercialize them over and above just the download of the music, track number 7. So that's like a big trend that's happening because of NFTs. As an example, with Gary Vaynerchuk, for instance, selling
Yep.
his stupid caricatures at Christie's. Do you know what I mean? It was a huge thing. And again, going back to this Gen Z millennial thing, creatively, I think they want a sense of ownership over and above what they can access just through a Spotify subscription, for example.
Well, listen, there's that aspect of the business without question, and I know it exists. To me, it's the surrounding universe of this business. People obviously trying to grow and extract more areas, and we're obviously there. I am not spending my days, or my weeks. I'm not saying I'm not consuming it, but at the end of the day, it's another vehicle to sell music. We're not making original music there. I think it's another platform. The NFT world. It 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 it's funny. It was going down one road, and COVID happened, and then it just exploded from once. It was almost like a headline story that everyone chased headlines. 2 years have gone by, and I don't know. I don't even know how to describe what even happened in the last 2 years of the NFTs outside of headlines. How we've got paid. It's funny. We've made some money in NFTs ourselves, but I still see when people come into meetings and they start talking the matter, I still kind of like look at it. I'm like, okay, I have an understanding, and I know there's probably money to be made there, but I guess I'm just more concerned with hearing music and how do you turn around and get music, synced and complemented in other ways. I mean, maybe it's an old school thinking, and maybe I'm missing it, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around the entire, new world that is. And listen, I don't think it's probably any different than when Napster came a calling, or when TikTok is coming calling. There's an uncomfortability with this new way. So call me old school, call me whatever. I don't know where we're going in that world. Obviously, I was reading actually a lot of stuff, on Mariah Carey and Christmas and what she's doing in that world, and of course, they're likely printing money. Now, does that reach all the consumers, and is everyone there? I don't know. I mean, I have teenage kids. I've got a 15 and a 19-year-old. I don't think they're in that world, quite frankly. And again, that's to each his own, and everyone's gonna be a little different. I'm intrigued. I think there's going to be a business there. And I think, again, going back to one of my headlines, music will be there without question, because music needs to be there. Guess what? Because music's not there, you're not going to get anyone to show up. And that to me that is what's telling for me. Like, sometimes, music can't be the leader, and it goes to show, it goes back even the days, let's go back all the days of whether it was the right or wrong decision, to MTV. MTV doesn't happen without music. You know what I'm saying? Like, they had to go cut a deal with the record labels. And by the way, they cut a better deal, than anyone else. I mean, they got the record label to spend all the money on making music videos in the 80s, and then, getting the rights to actually broadcast them for free. They built a business around that. So I don't equate it any different than where we are right now in terms of what's going on. It's a new day. I think there's a lot of different people vying for, quite frankly, real estate, from what I'm understanding, so to speak. It might be digital real estate, but that's where they're vying for. With, so you then that new Wild Wild West attracts a whole different level of business people. So, I think entertainment music will have to be there, or else it's not going to succeed. What the best position to take is, I don't really have an answer yet, but I'm interested to see how it plays out.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it is an evolving space, so it's very interesting to see. I think it's quite interesting also to observe that a lot of the artists themselves, the creators themselves, they're kind of taking the lead on what they want to do from an innovation perspective, so that they can access new segments of fans or listeners, and commercialize their rights.
Yep.
Right? It's really interesting to see. If it just maybe a little bit off center question here, but obviously you've made a lot of or you've had a lot of success, but also you made a lot of failure or made a lot of mistakes along the way. If you cast your mind back over the last few years, what would you say has been, in the building of this business, been your greatest failure, and what did you learn from it?
You know, our greatest failure is, when you make decisions in entertainment, making decisions for the wrong reasons, quite frankly. Because when you're dealing with music, it's an inherent equation that sometimes 1+1 will not add up to 2 because of the rights, again, that we are in the business of. In our instance, we are music publishers. So what do I mean by that? If we're going to go down a road and do a deal with someone, there's a record label on the other side that's responsibility is to actually make that artist a success. And we went down, got very aggressive at one point with too many contemporary artists, and we put probably too much money towards a couple of contemporary artists where we had a belief that they'd go further and bigger than we actually expected. So it was just a bad creative instinct of taking a shot on what I like to call chasing hits. And it's a dangerous thing to do in the music business, think that you could just chase a hit. And we kind of, we switched the mentality and chasing contemporary hits and thinking that we actually could really influence it. And that actually further cemented to what we've been doing is, more honestly, we've acquired old hits is what we've done. So we went from, we'd always been involved in the catalog business. And then probably I'd say, so we're about 16-year-old company, probably year 7 or 8, we got very aggressive in the contemporary space. And we thought we maybe had the magic touch. Can you pick, the next winner, so to speak? And, we got caught with a couple of bad deals, and that takes you to a position to reevaluate what you're really good at, reevaluate who's inside of your shop and what they're really good at. And then you have to set goals. So, all it did was, you just take a swallow of humble pie. You take your lumps on your books, and then you build accordingly. And, we did that. I don't like it because those deals still sit on your books, but it doesn't mean that you can't go on. And we've gone on and been actually much more successful, and because we've been more direct with our decision-making and more thoughtful over the process that we've gone through. So I think it just sharpens your pencil at the end of the day. And you just take the lumps.
Mm. Yeah, it's such an interesting thing, right? It's almost like I would equate an artist that you decide, like you mentioned, like you decide you're going to do this artist, this contemporary artist, and you're going to put your team around it, and you're going to execute on your plan. And then in reality, there's no guarantees. It's kind of like every contemporary artist is kind of like a startup. Like of the 100 that you go after, like only 50 might actually give you some kind of a return. I'm using those as rough examples because 1 in 2 startups fail. But I guess where I'm going with this is, how do you decide on which artist to back when music by its nature is so subjectively appreciated? It's kind of like art.
There's a bit of salesmanship in it. I mean, when you surround yourself with people who have a passion for entertainment, and it's their job to be invested in the culture and to find that great art, it's a part of the process. When someone calls you and has that feeling that they've heard something or seen something that is going to change others' lives, and it's a belief, and it's that passion that you have to sell. And like everything else, it's like, ABC always be closing, and that person has to, wear it, that they feel like that song and they have that vision. And then you start, just knocking them down until you get a deal done. And that's what's exciting when you hear a song or you see something that is so exciting. You just got to go after it. Like, it's a passion. That's what it is. You're passionate about something, to me, and that's any idea. And and again, music is so unique in terms of how it stands. But that's if you're an entrepreneur and you're coding something, or you've created something, or whatever it is. It just comes from that passion of like wanting to have success and not taking no for an answer. And I think that's just as the same in music as it is in any other business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really great point. I want to have a bit of fun with you for a moment. So I would love to give you the keys to the Matt Brown Show time machine. And if you could go back to yourself on day one, like I know it's a long time ago now, I suppose. But if you could go back to yourself on day one and give yourself a piece of advice about building this business, what would that advice be?
Building the primary wave business, or building?
Yeah.
piece of advice from day one. Wow, that's a doozy. I wasn't expecting that. I'm gonna have to really think in my brain in times for piece of this day one that I could use. Well, I think what I've always struggled with, at least, and this is me, and this is not just for business. I just think sometimes listening more. I'm very excitable. I'm very passionate, but I have learned as I've gotten older and surrounded ourselves with more employees, more partners, that you have to listen more. We started, it was two, and then it turned to four, and then it turned to six. I always had the bigger mouth, and then I don't know when it hit me, but it sometimes hit me that, like, when you grow and scale a business, you have to listen to other people. That's why you hire them, they're good people, and it took me a while for that to kick in. And I've realized the more I've done that, the better I've gotten. It's almost counterintuitive, everything I've done, because I always felt like I had to be I felt I had to be talking, but when I do less talking and I listen more, it makes me think better, and I can be more thoughtful with my response to give feedback from an experience that I might have seen or have done in a different way. So that's what it is, and that's something I've actually I know it's I've always worked on, because one of my first mentors at Arista had given me that advice. But like everything else, I think when you're flying high, you don't pay attention. Then when you're going down, you're low, and you figure like, oh, what was I not doing wrong? I always relied that I just have to sometimes listen more at the end of the day.
Yeah, most people are listening to respond, not listening to understand. And I think oftentimes as leaders, I think it's about providing a service to your team, not them providing a service to you. And at least great leaders. Like, I've had a few Navy SEALs on the show, and that's been the like Leif Babin. He was literally like, when we're on the ground in Afghanistan, wherever they might be, like, his job is to provide a service to his team, and it's like, well, if the connection is such that war is very similar to building a business, only you're not going to get shot or maimed or killed, but there's a lot of parallels there. And if leadership is the thing, to your point, Justin, then listening is a very important skill to develop.
And it's a skill, quite frankly, that I don't feel like I never got that schooling, so to speak. It's not something you learn in a textbook. It's not something that quite frankly, they taught at any type of education that I had. It took someone who knew my personality and watched the way I work and was impressed with certain aspect of it, but saw flaws. And that's also a difficult thing. It's difficult to identify and look in the mirror and then to correct. So I'm constantly working on those things.
Yeah, exactly. Justin, one more question, then we'll wrap up. Why do you do what you do? Like, when you get up in the morning, what gets you out of bed?
The excitement. Again, it's music is there, and I wait to hear that first song and be involved, in a small little way, no matter whatever that is. I know that there's songs that we've even are attached to because we acquired them, or that I played a creative role in, or that I've seen one of our team members pitch a synchronization. It's just exciting. Music is there every single day, at every single moment, in everything that I do. And I know when I turn the TV on, when the radio goes on, that there's some attachment to us. And people always ask me, like, how do you guys collect money? I can't even answer that completely, in the best way on a global scale, because we obviously track music and we have partners. But to explain it to a layman of how you make money from music around the world, it's a tough conversation. It's big to grasp. But that to me is exciting, knowing that, like, music is everywhere. And I play a really, and I know I'm humble that we play a very small part. And yes, there's headlines, and that's great, but we're nothing compared to really how big this music universe really is. And just, again, you have to be humble and kind of honored that we have the luxury to work with such great music. I know you hit some great names. Yeah, we were great. We were smart businessmen that were able to pull it together. But we weren't around when these legends, these greats, crafted these things. There's been a lot of people, from that first person that believed in that writer, that artist, from mom and dad that were there, that gave, whomever that first lesson, or that, or that first guitar, or that first piano lesson, like, just to be a part of that entire timeline. And that's what I always think about with music. It's not just for me. It's not just it's that timeline when it started. And that's when you see the movies, and like, I watched the Elvis movie, this past summer, and there's something about it. And you see the stories and how they're told, and really the long tail. And that to me is what is so freaking awesome.
Yeah, it is. It's really, really awesome. I mean, I must say, like when I did have my record label back in the day, I think I was probably having the most fun back then. You know, I was DJing in Ibiza and in caves in Malta, and you know, but it was also being part of this creative community, you know, and that we were all trying to figure out, well, what happens now, you know, because back then it was the internet. Like now it's about like the proliferation of ownership and Web3 and NFTs and this kind of thing. And so it is an evolving conversation. But like they said,
but it'll always come back to the creative. Even when you say those things, it always has to come back to the creative, because that secondary stuff is all the business. Remember, it's the music business. And I always you have to put those two together.
Yeah, that's very cool. That's actually very true. That's very
and
true.
And that's when, and you can't lose sight of that. And by the way, we all do, because that's inherent. It's the nature. It's in our DNA. But that's when you say those things. And that's why I get a little fuzzy when I hear all those words, because I know that's the secondary word, and it's got to be about the music. You know, when you close your eyes and you just hear that, you know, that first tone, you're like, think about how many times your brain can name a song within a couple seconds. That to me is unbelievable at the end of the day. And we can't do that with most things in our life. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Except now there's Shazam.
So true. So true.
Well, look, Justin, it's been a real privilege having you here, mate. And I'm looking, you know, thank you for being here. You guys achieved amazing success. And yeah, it's an evolving space, and you guys are at the forefront of it. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Thanks for just being as passionate about, you know, talking to people as I am about music. So much appreciated.
Anytime. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.
Be well. Take care.